Welcome to this now fourth installment of the Lessons from Legends series put on by the Real Estate and Economic Development program here at UB. The program and its student advisory club, the RETA Club, does a lot of things other than real estate and economic development. So just bear with me for just a second. Couple weeks, or Brendan, did you do the tour already? Yeah. Okay. We had a tour with David Hillman of 39 West Lexington, which was a redevelopment of the old BG&E headquarters building into 187 apartments right down the road. Back in early March, there was a group that was put together by M&T Bank, mostly of Merrick Properties principals, that came in and talked to a class of students, probably about 45 or 50 students, told them all about the different aspects of what Merrick Properties does, from development, entitlement, property management, construction, design. It was eye-opening. If you could cram an entire real estate career into about a 45-minute speech, the Merrick Properties people managed to do that. In February, we had a career exploration night where enterprise communities brought in their HR director and started talking about a lot of do's and don'ts if you're going into the job market and what you should do and how you should prepare, looking out over the online community if you're out looking for jobs. And then there is Argus training. So in real estate, Argus is like the Bible of if you're going to do financial modeling. So the students here are getting exposure into Argus. And then there are a host of other speakers. And then we have Lessons from Legends. So if you're new to Lessons from Legends, the way this works, this is a fireside chat, minus the fire. So that was a bad analogy, sorry. We find people who have made tremendous reputations, not by how much money they make or how many names they get on buildings, but these are folks who, through the course of a long and storied career, have built and maintained a reputation by doing good, honest, and honorable work. And tonight we are very fortunate to have our fourth person in here. Now, when we get to it, Mr. Gemignani will join the ranks of Tom Bizzuto, Ed St. John, and Jay Brody. Those are the three folks that we've had in before. So we're going to do another one of these in the springtime. Now, before we turn it over, I'd like to thank all the sponsors that have helped make this event possible. First off, the event sponsor is the Whiting Turner Contracting Company. So, Gino, Chip, thank you very much. Horde Copeland Mocked Architects, who also did all of the graphics design. So the beautiful pictures that you've seen out here, they were the ones that designed and produced all that stuff. Enterprise Communities, Jeff, thank you very much. And for those of you who don't know this, Jeff is an adjunct professor here at the Reed program. He teaches a couple courses, so that tells you how much the industry is engaged in with this program. M&T Bank, Commercial Real Estate Finance. Barbara Simmons, who is a member of our Real Estate Advisory Board, also did the thing with Merrick. She was able to get M&T to sponsor, and the Maryland Center for Construction Education and Innovation, which is my day job, and in full disclosure, which Gino is one of our founding members and vice chairman. So now, I can't just turn it over that easily without telling a quick funny story, because I've gotten to know Gino very well over the last couple of years. I first met him about 10 years ago when I was working with the Urban Land Institute trying to pull together a program on sustainable development. And he said, if you're going to talk to anybody, you got to have Whiting Turner up there. So naturally, we got introduced to Gino. Gino says, yes, we can do that. And we were getting ready to do all this stuff. And then he stops me and says, you know what? I know somebody within our organization that could do so much better job of telling you about this than I can. That's the humbleness that Gino puts together. He's not out for the spotlight, but he wants to make sure that the value is delivered to the audience. So fast forward a few years, this is back in 2010 when Maryland Center was just getting started. We were sitting at the Towson Diner having breakfast one morning, and it was almost impossible to get through the meal without being stopped by all the people that had to come over and say hi to Gino. And it told me that this man knows everybody. And he does it in a way where through respect. And then if you know Gino, one of his major things is that there is absolutely no apology for being early, and there is no excuse for being late to a meeting. So we had our MCCEI board meeting one evening, or one afternoon. Gino had a flat tire on the way. He had to stop and change his tire. So when he got to the meeting, he apologized profusely for being 5 minutes early. That's the kind of guy Gino is. Interviewing Gino today is Chip Lambertson, who is also with Whiting Turner. And at night, during when he fights crime and does other things, he is an adjunct professor at the CCBC teaching construction management. So you're catching a theme here about how this board is engaged in the education of our future students. So with that, I will turn it over to Chip, and then you can hear what Gino has to say.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. In the spirit of what we're taught at Whiting Turner, I'm going to try to keep the introduction brief, although it's not going to be easy. Our speaker tonight, our legend this evening, recently retired from Whiting Turner after 52 years. Senior vice president at the time, and he was responsible for the organization's business strategy and building technology initiatives. He continues to be actively involved, as Bob said, promoting and supporting the Maryland Center for Construction, Education, and Innovation as a vice chair. He also serves on a board as a board member or trustee in several organizations. Graduated from Mount St. Joe in Baltimore, and then moved into up to Baltimore Junior College, continued his education there, received his associate's degree in construction engineering. After that, went on to Loyola College and received his Bachelor of Science degree in physics. He's also a graduate of the leadership program of the Greater Baltimore Committee and Leadership Maryland. Gino is also the former president of the B&O Railroad Museum and a former chair of the Baltimore County Workforce Development Council, the Alliance for Mentally Disabled, the Governor's Workforce Investment Board, and the Collegetown Business Advisory Council. I could read all kinds of awards and accolades, but we don't have the time for all of them. The fact is, he's much, much more than that. Seems like anytime I go to a business meeting or a function of any kind and I introduce myself and I tell them I'm from Whiting Turner, I get one question. The first question is always, well, first of all, the first question is not, oh, didn't you guys build Raven Stadium, or didn't you guys build the aquarium? First question is always, do you know Gino? And there's two consistent things that happen every time, okay? First off, they never try pronouncing his last name, okay? You don't have to, because we know who Gino is. And they always ask the question with a smile. The first time I heard about Gino was, almost 30 years ago, and it was from my father. And I knew then, just by the way my dad talked about him, that this was a man of integrity and dignity. You're going to learn a lot tonight. In the next hour, you're going to hear a lot of information. You're going to learn a lot, including a very important lesson. And I'm speaking to everyone, especially the students. And that lesson is to succeed in business, or you can succeed in business, you can succeed in life, you can succeed in school, and be a genuinely good person. Gino has done that. He's succeeded with class, he's succeeded with grace and integrity. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our legend, Gino Gemignani.
Before we get started, I want to congratulate you on your chairmanship of the committee here, and just a note about Lambertson. Chip is a terrific guy. Took a little while to grab him and bring him into the fold. But we already had his brother, Steve, see, so we had both of them. And then I offered his father a job, and he refused to take it. So 2 out of 3, I feel like I'm pretty fortunate.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. About 17 and a half years ago, I was in your office, and you were interviewing me. Now I'm asking the questions. So,
Okay.
Well, there's a few more people in the room in this one. All right, we're going to start off with some easy ones, okay?
Softballs.
Yeah. What led you towards construction and engineering, and who were your mentors along the way?
I was very fortunate to realize at a very, very young age that I wanted to be in the building business. I loved it. my mentor there was my dad. My father was an Italian immigrant, and he came to America around the turn of the century. That's the last century. And he was just a terrific guy. He married my mother in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was a product of two Italian immigrants as well, so food was never in question at my house. There was always more than enough to go around. My father was 19 years older than my mother, so there's quite an age disparity. And my father, who had this wonderful talents with his hands, he was a self-taught, self-made architect builder, an artist, a sculptor, lover of music. He was wonderful, wonderful person, but he was a terrible businessman. And unfortunately, had some difficulties in the late 1940s and the early 50s. He went bankrupt. And one of the things I learned from that is no matter how desperate things can be, my father was never depressed, never down in the dumps, and was always thinking about, well, I can go do this or I can go do that. And out of that, I wasn't necessarily the charged, fired up guy, and I was kind of timid and bashful. And my father was the consummate, you can do it, don't be afraid, go out and take a challenge. So what if you fail? There's other things to do. Don't be afraid. And he constantly drilled that into my head. And I really give him all the credit. His toolbox, whether it was his drafting equipment or his cabinet making or his field construction, every tool in there I was free to use from the time I can remember, 5, 6, 7 years old, provided I learned how to use it, learned how to use it properly. So at the age of 6 or 7 in the Cub Scouts, my project was to draw a floor plan and elevation of a house that actually was in the window of one of the local shops in Pimlico where I grew up. So my father was just this incredible influence on my life. And what I learned from him was what he constantly said: never, 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 never give up. So he was my first role model. The second one was Father Joseph Sellinger, who was slightly different. Father Sellinger is a wonderful man, but speaking to him, he's more like a prize fighter than a college or university president. Very tough guy. You better be prepared. You walk into Joe Sellinger's office, otherwise you might be coming out a lot faster than you walked in. Be prepared. Take the time. Prepare yourself, whether it's in school or out of school. I love Joe Sellinger. I can't say enough about him. And his lesson was, competition's your best friend. Complacency's your worst enemy. And I think about that all the time. It's so easy to avoid, being challenged. And you don't know how good you are until you get on the field or on the court and in the gym, take the first punch, the first block, and you really know exactly whether you belong in that ring or on that court or not. So that was the second one. The third one is quite frankly my idol, and that's Mr. Willard Hackerman. He was just an incredible, incredible man. Personally, professionally, privately, publicly, he was the same being. Absolutely the same being. I never heard a foul word out of his mouth. I never heard a vengeful comment from him. He was just an incredible person. And if there's a legend, it's not Gino Gemignani. It's what I've learned from those three mentors of mine. They have just been wonderful, and I've been very blessed to have them. And I've learned from each and every one of them very, very important lessons. And yet none of them ever preached. They always just kind of influenced you in that way. Good. By the way, you have the right to take the hook when
No, you're doing great. Okay, you started with Wedding Turner in 1962, which happened to be the year I was born, by the way. So good year.
Ouch.
If you could, take a few minutes and just kind of walk us through your career path.
Yeah. You mentioned that Gino knows a lot of people. If you live long enough, you meet a lot of people. So the secret of that is just live long enough. Another thing about legends, I was thinking about it as I was driving down. I did visit my father's hometown, and found his birth record and his baptismal record, and his name was not Gino. It was not Gino, it was Gino. In Italian, it's pronounced Gino. And I'm thinking, my God, I am so happy that he changed his name to Gino and my name to Gino. Otherwise, the legend might have been a guy called Iggy. So, so anyhow, that would have looked a little funky on the letterhead. So my career at Wedding Turner, I started off as a project engineer. Lots of lessons there. At Wedding Turner, you start off and you go in the field. And the Wedding Turner colleagues have all done the same thing. You put anchor bolts in the wrong place. You make all kind of mistakes, but it's a learning process. And you learn from such wonderful people. I was primarily trained by the ironworkers. Now, there's a real group of guys that they really were the epitome of you never have to apologize for being early, and there's no excuse for being late. They were wonderful, and they had the patience to take this young whippersnapper who wasn't sure exactly where he was going, and they had some great comments about young people like me that I can't repeat right now, but they were wonderful. They taught and trained myself and other people. Unfortunately, I also remember a time that there was a carpenter pulling pulling wire mesh up, concrete, and they were, the wire mesh was on the ground, and they're pouring concrete over top of them. And I walked over to Ray Koski, and I said, what are you doing with that hook trying to pull that rebar up? It's supposed to be in the middle. What are you trying? It's not going to be there. And I remember him saying, that's the way we've always done it. And instead of me taking this opportunity to form a bond with somebody who's a devoted and talented worker, skilled, I opened my mouth and I said, well, you've been doing it wrong all those years. And I thought, what an arrogant little rascal you are. You're lucky he didn't take that hook and wrap it around your neck. That taught me a lesson. There's a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And leadership requires confidence, never arrogance. Arrogance never pays for anybody. And we see people do it, and it's really tragic. So I spent 4 or 5 years, actually about 10 years, doing GM plants, General Motors. And there you really learn that there is no tomorrow to get the job done. That assembly line is going to start at 5:30 on a Monday morning, and there's cars coming down that line, whether they're going to fall into an open excavation as you left or what, but you're going to get it done. So I did that, and then started to move around the country, became a project manager, and then eventually a vice president, opened offices in Virginia and Florida and California. And the message of Wedding Turner is so easy. It's, go out and do things. There's not a lot of restrictions. Honesty and integrity. Don't talk to the press are about the only things that you're restricted from doing at Wedding Turner. Marvelous environment to let people from all varied backgrounds grow, and it was wonderful. After about 27 years in operations doing building work, Wedding Turner had grown quite a bit, and there was a need for somebody to start thinking about how we should move in a business strategy in the future. Because Wedding Turner does not look like one company. It looks like a series of these little groups that develop. Today we have 37 offices around the country and probably 80 operating groups. Well, this is in the early, in the late 80s, and we were starting to compete against ourselves. I mean, it was to the point where you go to a pre-bid conference and there could be 3 different Wedding Turner groups represented, and they were all going to turn in a price, believe me. That competition was such. So my boss at the time, Ralph Pass, another wonderful mentor, who had a great saying, and his saying was, as soon as you teach somebody to do your job, you can go do another job. Go find something else to do. And you think about how that can impress people, particularly ones that don't feel like they're bound to anything other than a code of ethics. But everything else was opportunities, and go find those opportunities. So I got involved with the business development. We put together some strategies, and it was an interesting concept. My boss asked me to do this, and he said, but I got to tell you, there's 2 caveats. Number 1, there's no sales force at Wedding Turner, and we're not going to start one. And number 2, you're not allowed to advertise. So you think, oh boy, this is a great career in sales. But I figured it out that the best way for Wedding Turner to get work is to just introduce the wonderful people we have, the dedicated, passionate, knowledgeable people, and let them go do it. Gino, you step out because you're not going to influence that owner, and furthermore, you're not going to deliver that project. You're not going to deliver that project, Gino. And I wasn't. I was out of operations then. So to get the other folks in the company, the operations, the project managers, the project vice president, group vice presidents, to get them to go out. And once we did that, it really allowed the company to grow. And I just can't say enough about how that. I did that for about 15 years. We opened up offices, so it was helping guys get started, guys and gals get started in that. And then the last 10 years, I really have just fallen in love with the technology and where our industry is going. And it's in a radical revolution period that there's so much opportunity for people in this industry. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. So over the past 50 years, Wedding Turner's really expanded. You kind of touched on this a couple minutes ago. It's reached beyond the Baltimore Mid-Atlantic region, and you were a big part of that expansion. Could you shed some light on what led Wedding Turner to other parts of the country?
The basic policy, or employment policy of Wedding Turner is to hire young graduating engineers right out of college for a career, not a job. And in my 52 years with the company, we've never had a downsizing. I can't speak about before that, but in my 52 years, and I saw a number of downturns that were very painful, and I watched the leadership of the company, primarily Mr. Hackerman, deliver the message that we are here to hire people, not to lay people off. So whether it was the early 70s or the late 70s or the late 80s, every one of those, I've watched us go through it. This recent one, which was in 06 or whenever it exactly was, Mr. Hackerman, who was in then in his late 80s, and a bunch of us were gathered. And he said to the then leadership, spread out to about 100 people, raised his hand. He's always very polite. I have two requests. And he stands up, and he was in his late 80s, so a little more frail at the time. And he says, and this was his favorite line, do me a favor. He never told me what to do, but he told me a lot of favors, and boy, I did those favors. But he said, do me a favor. Don't lay anyone off, and make sure they all get a raise this year. They deserve it. They're the backbone of the company, and they're going to help us get through this and beyond. And the vision, the foresight, I just can't say enough about the man. He was just an incredible man, and I'm forever, eternally grateful for him. One other story I'd like to mention about him. This was, I guess, in the early 80s, and we were starting to grow, and that was kind of nice, and I guess I feel like, gee, the company's growing, and we're putting together a kind of a senior level team, and I was one of those guys, and we're going to have annual meeting, and we're going to get together and do some strategies and business plans and all that kind of stuff. So there's, 80 or 100 of us. And Mr. Hackerman, who generally did not attend meetings that went longer than 20 minutes because he couldn't understand why anybody needed to meet more than 20 minutes. But anyhow, he sat in the back of that room. And we were kind of fluttering our wings, and I was one of the presenters. And I had my graphs and my charts, and I was going through this thing, and, we're going to conquer and take the hill and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, his hand goes up, and he's in the back of the room. And he says, pardon me, can I say something? Okay, so he walks up very quietly, gets to the podium, and he stands there, and he looks at us. And he looks at us. And he looks at us. And he said, I want you to remember, it's very, 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 very important to be a nice person. Walked off the stage. I can't remember a chart, a graph, a word, anything. All I remember was that statement. And there's, again, someone who sensed that we're starting to look more at ourselves than we were at our customers. And, you know, a little bit of success can go to your head pretty quick. He was always there to bring us back to equilibrium. And, boy, if there's a lesson learned, I'd never forget that. And so he was absolutely terrific.
Now, as you know, University of Baltimore now has this construction management specialization, which allows community college students the ability to transfer the construction management credits into the READ program, Real Estate and Economic Development Program. As a matter of fact, we have several CCBC students out here today that are considering that in the future. What kind of advantage do you think someone would have with a construction background entering the real estate and development industry, or vice versa, someone with the real estate education if they were getting into the construction industry? That collaboration of the two, what kind of advantage would they have?
I always say that knowledge is a valuable commodity, and it is a commodity today because you can literally find anything you need to know on the internet pretty quickly. I am so proud of UB, University of Baltimore, now having an opportunity for people with your technology degrees to be able to come into a university and be able to transfer and have those articulate into another program with the opportunity to graduate with an additional 2 years and get a bachelor's degree. When I there was absolutely no opportunity at all. Two schools that were local that could afford me the opportunity to go in the evening were Johns Hopkins, wonderful engineering program, and quite frankly, we probably wouldn't have much of a consulting engineering business in Baltimore if it wasn't for the many, many, many people who graduated from Johns Hopkins, McCoy College, or College of Engineering at night. Loyola also had an engineering physics program, and when I applied there, they were willing to accept a number of my credits, primarily English. They were liberal arts credits, but they were willing to accept them. I think it was probably 12 or 14, 15 hours, but that was 12 or 15 hours that I didn't have to go to a bank and take a loan out, which I did every semester. So also, there was something that was very appealing to me, having gone to Mount St. Joe. A number of my classmates from high school immediately went to Loyola. It was almost like it was post-high school, you went to Loyola College. Steve was a member of that as well, and it's a wonderful institution. So I went there, and the program was in its infancy, and so I wound up majoring in physics. And at the time, there wasn't many people impressed at Whiting Turner that I was getting a degree in physics, nor was I, but I wanted to finish technical education and to fulfill a math background and so on. As it turns out, I look back now, and a lot of the information that I learned back in solid state physics and some other areas are very prevalent in today's environment, and they're going to be dominant components of the building industry in the future. And so I say, information is important. Now, how does that relate to somebody with a real estate background? If you can understand the building process, you might not need to know how to design the footings, the columns, the trusses, but to understand what the sequence is and what the operations are will make you a better real estate person. And vice versa. There's times when we were so focused on construction, I could be careful I say this, not that we didn't care, but we didn't pursue what that owner was really all about. I think we understand now, if you're going to build a bio suite, you better understand what biotechnology is all about. If you're going to be involved in a hospital environment, you better understand each department, how it works, how they relate, if you're going to do a good job building it. So I think when it comes to real estate, it's important for us to understand the cash flow of a project, the development requirements. How does that all come together? The timing of these. We always get frustrated. Well, they couldn't release this, or they haven't decided on that. Well, that's because we don't understand the development business. And so I think it's really important to have us understand not only our industries, but all the industries we're engaged with, And that's going to become more and more dominant as time goes on.
So you've been involved in many projects in the past, but what's so impressive has been and continues to be your vision for the industry. You're always looking ahead, the latest innovations and technologies. Please describe, where you see our industry heading and what's out there, what's in the future.
Glad to. By the way, if anybody has any questions, it's supposed to be a conversation, so please feel free to ask anything that you want about it. You mentioned 50 years, 30, almost 30 of them building buildings. And I built more ugly buildings than any one person should be responsible for. Glass houses with big ventilators and General Motors plants and so on. And I thought, my God, I'll never have a chance to build anything that I can bring home and show my 3 daughters, because they certainly don't want to see these ugly buildings. Anyhow, eventually I was given an opportunity to get out of the industrial markets and to move into some other commercial markets. And a project like the National Aquarium certainly was something that was really exciting and challenging, and still remains a beautiful structure and so on. So it was fun to be engaged and be a part of that. One of the things that you learn, I think, in this business very early on is that nobody builds a project. Nobody builds a project. And I can remember that very clearly when I was in my trailer at General Motors and watching an iron worker 60 feet in the air with a bucket of bolts in each hand walking across a wide flange, and thinking to myself, supposing he wasn't here to do that, you think Gino would go up there and do that? Not a prayer. So you really learn that it takes a team to build a project. And the sooner you learn that message, the better off you are. And whether you're working with a laborer, an ironworker, a carpenter, a bank president, design architect, any one of the number of engineers, building inspectors and so on, you really need to build an environment of teamwork. And if you don't do that, you're going to have a hard time. If you do it, you'd be surprised how wonderful the project will go, and how much better, and everybody gets to share in it. It's a wonderful, wonderful business to be in. As far as the future of the building industry, I would say, from my point of view, certainly people are going to have other views. We've been building buildings pretty much the same way for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. They were piling either a brick or something on top of one another, and that's the way buildings were built for a long, long time. And understood arches really well, and how we could use the arch structures to bring in more light and do some things. But really nothing changed dramatically until structural steel came in, and which was an import from Europe. And carbon steel really made a big difference. Now our buildings could go vertical. We could take stresses that we couldn't take before. And we could really make these buildings a lot higher densities and higher buildings, and take a lot of forces that we couldn't before. Outside of structural steel, which came in before I was on the job, I look at my 50 years and not much took place. I mean, it was the same old, same old. And that sounds kind of cruel, but there wasn't a lot of really dramatic changes. I mean, you think about what changes have taken place in your lifetime. The internet. I mean, that really changed the paradigm. It was a business shift. Everything changed with the internet. Everything changed from the mainframe to the PC. It was a different world. It was a different environment. So, how many of those happened in the building industry? And I don't think there was a lot of them. I really don't. Until now. Now, I think, now's the wow. Now the whole industry is going to change. And it's going to change radically, and it's really a pleasure to be here at the University of Baltimore, because one of those projects that reflect the beginning of that process is the new University of Baltimore Law Building, Law Library. It's a terrific building. It has architecture that may or may not appeal, but almost everything else about the building is fantastic. And are components that are going to be really paramount in every building as we go forward. And it's ironic because when I talk about it, I have an aerial photograph, a little slide presentation that I use. And there's 2 or 3 buildings in this neighborhood that date back to the 1880s and 90s. An old Greek Orthodox church, the Lyric Theater, and the B&O Mount Royal Station. And then there's a plethora of buildings that were built in that next 100 years, up and down Charles Street and in this Mount Washington area. But there's only one University of Baltimore Law Library and the dynamic components that make that building up. There's a reason why this change is happening, and I've always titled the 5 drivers of radical change in the building industry. It really goes beyond buildings because many of the other areas of the construction industry, the design, or the entire built environment are changing, and they're changing rapidly. The first one is LEED. LEED has been around for, I can remember Bob Manfredi, who was with RTKL, came back from a conference in 1990 and was talking about green buildings, and I thought that was fungus up the side of the building or something. But he was all passionate about this green building, and at the time, it didn't really take off very quickly. It was a little slow taking off. But my gosh, what it means today in terms of not only energy conservation, because it certainly is an important component there, but the way the entire building process is done. When I think back in my time as a field engineer, we were not energy users, we were energy abusers. If you needed 3 yards of concrete, order 5 yards of concrete. It was a cheap commodity. Steel, buy as much as you need. You always have something on hand, which most of the time you threw out afterwards. So you not only brought more materials to the job site than you needed, you had to get rid of more materials than you needed. So it's a real paradigm shift for us to start thinking of our buildings now in terms of this LEED, which is leadership and energy and environmental design. So it's a process that really engulfs the community, the building community, the design community, the construction community, but the community at large. And it is not going away. I don't care if they give the oil away from the pipelines or whatever. Our responsibility to the environment requires us to pay attention. You think about the waste stream off a construction site. It was horrible. I mean, everybody crated everything up, more cartons than you could shake a stick. And, what were you doing? Why did you have all that? You had to get rid of it all. So there was a lot of waste, not only waste of time, but a waste of energy, and all of that takes energy to produce. And now we're taking a conscious look at that and saying, that's not what we should be doing. We need to be responsible to our environment, and we need to be responsible in the way we manage projects so that they are sensitive to the environment, and they are sensitive to the energy that we need, which is very precious. So regardless if it becomes a cheap commodity again or not, LEED is here. Now, young people won't let us. When the Ginos and the abuser of the early 60s are gone, these young people understand their responsibility to the community, and they want to make sure that they are and their offspring are in a clean environment. So LEED is the first one. The second one is BIM, Building Information Modeling. I am passionate about the use of this tool, and it's not a new tool. It's been around, again, for 30, 40 years, primarily in aligned industries. The automobile industry, which I was very familiar with, has been using it for quite some time. and so has the airline industry and the aerospace industry and the shipbuilding industry. It's a marvelous tool. So instead of doing the design in 2 dimensions, you now are doing it in 3 dimensions. And you're doing it digitally. So it allows you to literally build every part of that project in the model. And of course you have all the beauty of the modern technology that allows you to expand them, shrink them, dissect them in very many ways, which you could do, but it was very difficult in 2 dimensions. And so these 3-dimensional models, there's a couple of software packages that are dominating this, Revit being the one in its aligned mechanical and electrical and structural components. And it is just a marvelous tool. And it's marvelous for a couple of reasons. Number one, so you're creating a model, and you can drop into the building and pull it apart so that the end user can now see their space in a virtual way, but they can experience their space. So a doctor can see an OR, a nurse can see a nurse call station, a teacher can see our classroom. It's in a virtual way, but it's a lot better than them looking down at 2-dimensional drawings and trying to figure it out. For all of us that have been in the industry, the 3rd dimension, we can understand it. It's intuitive for us. But for 90% of the people, it's not. They don't see plans every day. We do. So this allows the end user to really experience their new space in a virtual way, but these models are getting so sophisticated, it's hard to tell that it isn't a photograph. So that's number one. It's absolutely paramount that you allow the end user to experience that space. I've heard far too often in my career, a bank president or somebody comes in and sees their space and says, gee, I didn't know that's what it was going to look like. It's kind of tough to make any changes then. So that's the first beauty of BIM. The second part is, if you can build the project in a model, you can build it in the field. Because you can literally bring all the components together. And the refinement of that process is absolutely astonishing, because we can not only draw lines that represent pipes and valves and fittings, we can now identify the pipe, the valve, and the fitting, and the manufacturer, and all the geometry that goes with it. So we're getting more and more and more refined. We think it's wonderful. Again, the aerospace and shipbuilding industry have been using it for years. We're using it now, and it's a marvelous tool. And it's going to provide a lot of new opportunities. We've been trying to hire people with a background and education in 3D modeling, and they're hard to come by. And many universities are not incorporating this. Some schools are. The University of Florida has been very good to us, sending us people that are interested. They come out of engineering curriculums, but they also have had enough education in these techniques and these tools to really be a lifesaver and a value added to us and to our customers, which is very, very important. The third one is, I guess I should say there's 5, so it's not 52. There's 5. So I won't drag it out too long. The third one is modularization. Modularization means that we are now assembling building components. We are manufacturing building components. And I know that's hard to hear people talk about manufacturing when you talk about construction. But the truth of the matter is, construction is going to become a manufacturing process. And we're going to assemble those assemblies, those components on a job site. And we're doing it now, but it's going to continue into the future. Huge opportunities for people to be able to get into this industry, not through the trades of the past. And nothing there's wrong with the trades in the past. They're wonderful people. But field labor is going down. Believe me, it's going down. There's fewer and fewer workers on the job site. Shop labor is going up. If you look at the field labor, it was based on craft training. If you look at the shop labor, it's based on technical education. So the community colleges, such as CCBC and the other ones, and to have people learn that information and to be able to come and finish a degree is, again, I congratulate the University of Baltimore. This is the way we build ships. This is the way we build airplanes. This is the way we build cars. And now this is the way we're going to build buildings. They're going to be different. I can tell you, if you go to Europe, and this struck me so vividly walking through the Amsterdam's airport, Schiphol Airport, and seeing the entire building was a manufactured process, whether it was the floor, the ceilings, the walls, the light fixtures, or whatever. And the artistry was a tradesman. There was a piece of brick wall that was laid inside of a planer, and there was a piece of sculptured marble. You know, it's kind of tragic in a way, but it's the reality of where we're heading. And I don't think in the long run we're going to be disappointed. Our buildings are going to be different, but they're going to be much more exciting. They're going to be much more efficient. They're going to be, the construction process and operation is going to be much more safe to be able to build these things. I mean, you look what our tradespeople do now on a scaffold in the middle of the winter when it's snowing or raining and they're upside down trying to do a weld of a 16-inch pipe or something. It's really, it's tough. Those now can be done in a completely controlled environment. Production costs are going to come down, or overall building costs are going to come down, a much cleaner environment, and the insurance rate should start coming down because more and more of it's going to be removed from the job site. And eventually we're going to start banging on the table saying we want rebates back on the insurance component. The fourth one is demographics. The demographics of the building industry is going to be changing. It's always changed. We've always had immigrants come into our industry, and I think they will be coming in. But it's very different now because a lot of the training that we heretofore, they brought skills with them, many of them. And certainly know about the many of the European that came here, or the Latinos who came here from various Spanish-speaking and brought their skills and so on. I think we're going to see that, but it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be oriented around technology in the future, and I think that's a good thing. The other thing is women. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful opportunity for women in the construction industry today, because much of what's going to be done isn't going to require the physical force that it required in the past. Like it or not, robots are coming to our industry. ENR just had a nice article on that. You know, they have robots laying bricks now, and that's going to continue, just like it did in all these other industries. So the technology part, where there's a great opportunity for people that are interested. The sad thing is we haven't gotten it to our young people. I mean, the high school kids should be playing with Autodesk or with SketchUp or one of the other ones and start to play with the technology. It's every bit as exciting as they're playing the games now. Give them something to jump into. Our industry's always suffered from an image problem. It's probably, and Bob quotes this all the time, we're ranked, I think, below just about everybody, including short order cooks, as an industry to aspire to. But it's such a opportunity for such wonderful technology and very exciting time in our industry. So I would hope that we'd be able to change that paradigm there and get younger people more interested. We have an aging workforce, and if we don't, if we don't start to realize it, we could lose this industry. We've lost the steel industry. We've lost the shipbuilding industry. We lost the steel industry. We're having a challenge in the airline industry. I don't want us to lose the building industry. I really don't. And there's no reason for it. There's absolutely no reason for it. But we've really got to get young people inspired to get into this industry because it is exciting and it's rewarding. The fifth one is the process and policies of the building industry. You know, we have 5,700 building codes in America. Probably don't need that many. Maybe 4,500 would do. It's just ridiculous to see we're doing so many things because of policies and procedures that really don't relate to the final project, that the owner wants to build. I'm all for making sure we have good life safety codes in buildings. I'm all for respecting the building and the communities and so on. But we have so many of them. Can you imagine if we did that with the airline industry? I mean, you wouldn't want an airplane that had to meet 5,700 codes flying across the United States. So we need to start to think about a different way of doing this. Our industry has been riddled with bad policies and bad practices. There's several studies that show that while many industries increased efficiency and quality of output, ours, the building industry, actually has gone the other direction. We build buildings that aren't as good as they used to be, and they take longer, and it's a shame. It's just criminal, and there's no reason for it. I don't recommend books very often, particularly written by attorneys, but there's a fellow written a book called Broken Buildings and Busted Budgets. And it's a scathing report of how our industry has been abusive and the whole process of how we go about acquiring someone to build a building. I wonder if you needed surgery, would you put it out for the low bid? You just think about the real conflicted message there. And yet, buildings are very complex, and projects are very complicated. And there's a lot of risk out there, not only financial risk, but there's also life safety risks that we need to be responsible for those. So those are my 5 drivers. They're happening now. I can tell you on many jobs that we're doing, we're prefabricating a lot of the building off-site, bringing it on-site. The difference is, and the big challenge is, and this is where UB with a business program and many other universities, we haven't digested the supply chain that's going to change and the logistics. We have not addressed that yet. And that's going to be a big game changer because we're going to be buying things differently than we did. Remember, heretofore, most of what we did was to bring either raw material to the job site, aggregate, cement, so on, and make concrete, or we brought manufactured process, brick and mortar and so on, or we brought some finished components like light fixtures that weren't wired, or air conditioning units, air handlers or chillers that weren't piped. All that had to be done. Why are we doing that? You know, when GM puts a dash in a car, that dash is ready to go. It comes in and it fits exactly into that body without any questions asked. And all the gauges and all the switches and all the dials and the radios and everything is already in there. Somebody does it. It happens to be Johnson Control. We just found that out. But it's amazing that that's what they do. And that's a whole different supply chain and logistics for our industry. And we have not approached that yet. But boy, somebody's going to figure that puzzle out and do very, very, very well.
Great, thanks. Because we have a couple minutes, if there's questions.
Yeah, so the average company contractor is not Whiting Turner. The average contractor is probably 10 people. You talk about this advent of technology and modernization, all that stuff costs money. And it's not really scalable for these smaller firms. So do you see a lot more consolidation, a lot much more Whiting Turner sized companies? And how does that work with these smaller projects? That's a piece I really can't fill in. But
That's a great question, Mike. And I honestly don't have the answer. But I will tell you that there's been consolidation throughout America's industrial life. We went from hundreds and thousands of breweries to 4 or 5. Now we've spun back and we have all these new breweries showing up on a small scale. So I don't think necessarily, and I know what you're driving at, can a small company afford to invest in technology? I think with the price of technology falling rapidly, I think they can. And if they can't, I think they can find ways to partner. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, I guess, that, and this might be a great opportunity for somebody. I can't imagine 3 plumbing companies deciding they want to pull together their IT capabilities and buy one Revit pipe and one Revit duct software. But I think there'll be opportunities to outsource that, as there are today, so that you can hire a modeler. Some of them actually understand buildings, some of them don't, but there are modelers that you can hire, and they'll come in and do your model for you. So I think there's opportunities for the smaller one. I would hope so, because I certainly value all of them.
How long it's taken to smaller companies to adopt BIM. I can only imagine how long it would take for a company to adopt robots. Yeah, they won't spend the money for BIM, certainly not, but this whole idea of outsourcing, yeah, I can see that work.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a more prevalent in the future. Yes?
Gino, I want to change your title just for a second.
Gino, I want to change your title just for 1 second from being retired and this legend, and I want to make you the Superintendent of Education for the state of Maryland. And I want to hear your philosophy, because it could be a little dangerous, but I just want to hear your thought process, because you talked about a shrinking workforce where people are going out on one side, and then we know we got to bring people in on the other side. Education, training. If you just want to speak to that. If not, I understand, but
Yeah.
I'd just like to hear your viewpoint on that, because I know you're very much involved in that.
Yeah, I'm consider it very important, and quite frankly, that's the genesis of the Maryland Center for Construction Education and Innovation. And those two words were put in there deliberately because we do think there's an opportunity to be innovative, even on the academic side and the education side. It's very important that we think about new ways. I started off by saying I was blessed that I had a father that kind of let me get involved, and most of my friends, when we were playing baseball or softball or whatever we were playing, I mean, they had no idea about a block plane, how to use it, or any other tools, and I did, and I was very proud of that. So what does that say? Exposure is really important. I don't think we're exposing our young people and letting them, particularly at the time of their life, when their head is just full of great ideas, we ought to be letting them, expose them to everything we possibly can. I remember walking down Bethlehem Steel and being on the platform and watching steel being, the ladle being tapped. My God, you watch this metal at 2,600 degrees or whatever it is, Mike's going to correct me. I mean, you saw poetry, you saw mathematics, you saw science, you saw artistry, you saw so much there. I think every child should be able to see that, whether it's in a hospital or a steel plant or so on. I just don't think we're stirring it up early enough. And I'm not sure why that is. Why aren't we doing that? I mean, I think it's absolutely paramount to get our young people inspired as early as they possibly can. I know my guidance counselor in high school said there's a closet at the end of the hallway, and that's where all the catalogs are kept. That was the end of. Now, fortunately, I knew where I was going. But for a lot of people, they go to college, and we ran into it. We were hiring people, and kids after 4 or 5 years of engineering come to work, and they find out that, hey, I really wanted to be a veterinarian. That's a shame, but a lot of that. As a matter of fact, 1 year we tracked it. We lost, we had hired 100. Within 3 years, we lost 50. So, we were netting out, or we lost 87. We hired 100, lost 87. And most of them didn't go to another contractor. They left the industry. So, yeah, that bothers me. I don't think we're quite doing it. I think also we're finding now the value proposition of education is going to be challenged. It's going to be challenged severely. And I don't know of a university that's not really drilling down in that. I know Loyola, I was on the board when they started their initiative 2 or 3 years ago. And they were drilling down, looking and questioning everything they do. Mitch Daniels from Purdue, who's the governor of Indiana, said last night that when he went to Purdue, the very first thing he did was say, we have asked our students' parents to pay for our cost increases every year. Now we're going to reverse that curve, and we're going to go back the other way. We're going to show them that we can reduce the cost by us eliminating wasteful procedures. So I think the whole value proposition of education is going to be changing and going under a microscope. I don't know about most of you, but so much of what we learn is from the theoretical to the applied, if you ever get to the applied. I mean, it's a shame that, the theories that we learn, so often we never know where they're applied. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't reverse that. I know UMBC has had a program for a number of years where one of the mechanical professors, a lovely woman, she goes out to elementary schools and starts the process of challenging them. Little Red Riding Hood's got to get across the stream. Why are you going to get across the stream? We got to build a bridge. What's a bridge? And just start to get kids start to think about those things. I think that's where we have to go. Hope that's not too long on winded. Thank you.
What do you plan to do now that you're in retirement?
That's the hardest question. I'm still involved in a number of boards that are primarily connected to education, a couple of engineering boards and so on. It was funny, I was at Loyola the other day at their semi-annual board meeting, and they talk about Loyola, the school and the engineering program, and then they have the seniors come in and do their senior projects. And they started that, the first group went through and did theirs, and a young woman sat next to me and she said, I turned to her and I said, oh, you're a student at Loyola? She said, well, I'm a 5th year student. I didn't finish last year, so I'm finishing this year. And I did my senior project last year. I said, oh, you graduated in June. And I said, what do you plan to do? She said, I'm going to work for Whiting Turner. I mean, it was incredible. I thought, my gosh. Yeah, I'm not sure. I love education. I just would like to see young people engaged earlier and earlier. Can I have a minute to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm an ex-WT.
I know.
Yes, and one of the things I admired about the company and the message from Mr. Hackerman was that mistakes were a great thing, or you never wanted to get rid of a person who made a mistake because that was a valuable lesson.
Right.
And so I wonder for you, for those of us who've been in the business for long enough, we have the nightmares of our past, that were the projects that were so difficult that we learned the most lessons from. And I wonder if you're willing to share any of some of your tougher lessons or things that you learned the hard way.
Yeah, that could be a whole other session.
Yeah, look at the time.
Yeah, we've all done those where we sure we were doing the right thing, and it didn't turn out that way. I have as many as anybody, whether it was designing the wrong form for a concrete pour, or putting a crane in the wrong place and you can't make the pick when you expected to, or whatever. But you bring up a very good point, and that is those lessons, and I'm talking about honest lessons. I'm not talking about somebody skimping on safety or quality or whatever, but people that make honest mistakes. They're valuable. They really are valuable. Just like Mr. Hackerman gave you that message, and he always had a couple that he loved to refer to, and I think that's really important. So I thank you for asking that. I have one thing I want to kind of maybe close with in terms of where this change in the industry is going. When I look at the building industry, I see the collision of 3 technologies. The first is building technology. The buildings that we built in the past were pretty much static. A brick did a brick job of creating a barrier. A window was a barrier between the outside environment and the inside environment. The carpet we walk on, or the concrete we walk on, the doors open and close. They were all single entities that did one function. In the future, most building components are going to be multitasking, just like we're asked to do. So what does that mean? Well, you look at a window. There's no reason why a window can't be the barrier from the outside environment, from the inside, insulated, so we don't have a thermal drop across there. It can be a photon collector, and many of them are. They're collecting rays from the sun, and they are collected and generating electricity. Or the photons cause them to shade. We have windows and panels now that as the sun impinges on them, they get darker and darker and darker. And it could also be, we have all this RF frequency being used to operate everything in a building. No reason why those windows aren't beautiful antennas. We're using photonics and nanotechnology all over the place. I was reading not too long ago about masonry units that are going to be embedded with nanotechnologies that are going to be able to collect photons. And so we're going to be wiring bricks up, There's lots of things that are going to be changing. Every time we open a door, that closer is pushed open. There's mechanical energy taking place. It's going to close on its own. Why isn't there some mini generator on there? Why, when we walk across these floors, we're generating, there's a huge amount of kinetic energy in a building all the time. That we're going to be going back and capturing that energy and utilizing it. And so you think about buildings, net zero buildings sound pretty sexy when it was first introduced a couple years ago. But now there's no reason why we can't be thinking seriously about net zero buildings. So that at the end of the day, or the end of the month, it's a balance between what it's taken off the grid and what it's put back in the grid. And there are many, many techniques that are used in that. You think about that as a potential to solve our housing problems. People in third world countries are still living under cardboard. We can be manufacturing housing units that are pretty self-sufficient in terms of energy by capturing the sun or whatever other utility or energy sources out there. And just think what we would do. How about the housing, the people in Baltimore City that can't pay their electric bill? Supposing there was an electric bill. Suppose we remove that cost from them entirely. We have the technology to do that today. So building technology is really, really exciting opportunity. And it's exciting from the people that are going to be manually working with that, assembling those units, which is going to be a manufacturing job, or the technicians that are working with it, people that are going to be studying material science. Material science is going to boom. It's a great area to get into. Areas that we've been literally disregarded in our industry are now going to come alive, and they're going to be very, very exciting areas. So the building technology is going to be rapidly changing. Geothermal wells and all the other bells and whistles. UB Law, they capture all the rainwater, and they use it for watering their gardens and flushing toilets, gray water. Well, just the mere fact that they're not taking that water from the city to use to flush the toilets or sprinkle the bushes or whatever is terrific. And I think, it's some extra pipe or a cell to store that water. So there's lots and lots of opportunities to do really exciting things with the building technology. The second technology is the technology of buildings. The way we build buildings is changing. And robots are going to be playing a part. There's a robot right now that allows us to take the data off of the model from the computer and put it to a theodolite. And so one person can go out and locate every component that's going to be in that concrete pour. And things that we didn't even put in there before because we had no idea where they were going. Pipe hangers, we were putting, strips in there and trying to, hopefully we found the right place to put it. And normally after we stripped the concrete, found out the hanger wasn't in the right place. Anyhow, we can now do that down to very, very, very minute, definitive dimensions, which is wonderful. So instead of a guy being on a scaffold 20 feet in the air, laying on his back, drilling an anchor, that anchor's already been set. And so that whole process is eliminated. It's got to be safety value and cost value there. So that whole operation, which was done in my day, because I did it, and you had somebody on the transit or the level, and you're out shooting the points, and then you had string lines that were always done on a windy day, so you had to take the average of where the string was as best you could, and snap a line, and that night it rained, so the next morning it was all gone anyhow. So you look at that process, how much we've advanced. So the technology of buildings is really changing. So building technology, how we build them, robotics is happening. It's going to continue to happen. When I started, a 10,000 square foot pour on an elevated deck was 40 people. It was 40 people. You had to build runways, you had Georgia buggies, you had hoppers and cranes, and it was a very slow, tedious. That's been replaced with a concrete pump, which is a one-arm robot, right? It took 40 people. Now it's got one guy on the pump and a couple finishers and a couple laborers, and that's it. So it's a 5-man operation rather than a 40-man operation. So that's going to continue. So building technology. And the third thing is the technology of building, which really plays into the whole real estate equation. These buildings, as I described, are no longer static. They're going to be dynamic. They're going to be doing multifunction tasks. And when we're not going to have people running around as, quote, stationary engineers or building engineers, computers are going to be doing that. And those computers can be remote. So you talk about outsourcing. There's many people that are outsourcing their entire maintenance plan and operations plan to somebody that could be 1,000 miles away, but taking the data from the computers and being able to have the instruments modify whether it's the combustion rate or the air conditioning or whatever it is. That's going to continue. The value proposition in the building, which was always life cycle cost and I'm not sure of all of it, but certainly land cost and development cost, was what you worked with. Nobody's talked about performance, building performance. I think building performance is going to be demand in that, so that when you say that we've designed this to LEED silver, which every building in Baltimore has to be LEED silver. How about LEED gold, platinum? Well, how about net zero? And you built it to net zero, and I prove it. On a day I commission it. It's proven. It met specifications. It met design criteria. It's net zero. How about 3 weeks later? How about 3 months later? Or 3 years later? Somebody's going to come back and say, prove to me that it's a net zero building 3 years from now. Because that's going to be part of the value proposition of real estate in the future. And I think we need to start addressing that sooner rather than later. There are some wonderful opportunities about managing buildings more efficiently in the future than we have in the past. And I think that's going to play into the real estate component of the education here very nicely. And I'm glad to hear they're merging into this project management curriculum.
All right.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Gino, Chip, thank you very much. Gino, this is the Deborah Ford Award.
Oh, great.
Our fourth Lessons from Legends.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I did neglect to do one thing in the opening remarks. I forgot to acknowledge one of our sponsors, the Fitzgerald Apartments, which is built and developed and owned and managed by the Bizzuto Group. And there's a couple people I'd like to embarrass at this point. Liz Jones and Monica Robertson, who's not here, and Leslie Joyce, who helped put this all together. And my immediate predecessor on the board with Daniel Thomas and Sean Davis. I believe the Lessons from Legends concept was your idea, so it is certainly flourishing, so thank you both very much. Daniel's actually leaving us. He's moving out west to take on a new role with St. John Properties. So in June, so you're going to leave a big hole to fill, Daniel, but thank you very much for everything that you've done for the program. Thank you all very much. We'll be back in the fall with another legend to share their wisdom. Enjoy the night, be safe, and we'll see you next time.